Hey guys, welcome back. In last lecture, we created an observable by creating an instance of observable create. But there are various ways to create an observable. So in this lecture, we are going to look at various methods to create an observable. So first in the list is the create factory method, observable, let's say integer, source, and here observable dot create. Here comes the lambda. Emitter, and then we call the three events. First we emit all the values using the onNext call, then eleven, 12, and after the emission of all the values we call the onComplete action. And if we want to handle the error, we can call the onError inside catch after enclosing this implementation inside try. So this is how we can create an observable. Let's subscribe it. Subscribe. Out print ln. We have just given the implementation to onNext method, so it's printing 10, 11, and 12. Here in onComplete, we are not having any implementation, so that's why it's not printing anything after the completion of emission. Next method that we are going to talk about is just method. The create method is very rarely used. Here we write a lambda, we take e, and then we invoke onNext method, onComplete method, and onError method by ourselves. We have just method. We just pass the values in this just, and onNext, onComplete, and onError, all these method calls are implicitly done by this just method. So see, observable, integer, just, observable dot just. So here you can pass minimum 1 element up to 10 elements. So it has overloaded just. So here let's pass 3 elements, 1, 2, and 3. So 1 will be emitted on the first invocation of onNext, then on the second invocation it will emit 2, and on third it will emit 3, and then it will invoke the onComplete. In case of any error, it will invoke onError. So let's subscribe to it. System.out println. Now let's execute this. So it prints the elements 1, 2, and then 3. Now next is, suppose you want to create an observable from an iterable. For example, list, set, queue, or any iterable from java.lang.iterable package, we have from iterable method. from Iterable. So if we have a list holding some strings, let's create list using the of method, ram, sham, and let's say my. Now to create observable from this list, we will use from iterable method. So observable dot from iterable. And here we'll pass the list. Now let's subscribe to this observable iterable dot subscribe system dot out and talent. And let's execute this. So it prints Ram, Sham, and Mike. So these three are the most basic and most discussed methods to create an observable. But we have many more. Let's have a look on them. Next method is range method. It is for range-based emission, so it takes start value and the total count. We also have its long equivalent. So suppose if you're passing 3 and 10 to this range method, and by using subscriber, you're subscribing to the observer that prints all the elements returned by or emitted by this observable. It will start printing from 3, and then each on next invocation will return an incremented value. So it will start from 3, 4, 5, and it will increment 10 times the value. So you will get 3 to 12 printed on the screen. Now let's see the next method. Next is interval. It takes time period and the unit. So if you are invoking this interval with 1 second interval, it will print an infinite stream starting from 0. Each second it will print an element or emit an element. And as it's a time-based observable, time-based observables operates on a timer. So they needs to run on a separate thread, and they will run on the computation scheduler by default. So our main method is going to stop this observable because main method completes and it is running on a different thread, so it will not wait for it to finish. That's why we need to invoke sleep with particular time interval, so to let it execute during that interval. Now next one is from future. We pass a future to create an observable from that future. Now next one is empty. If we want to create an empty observer, we invoke the empty method. It will emit nothing. It will just call the onComplete action. So if you provided the onComplete implementation, this empty will only invoke that implementation. Now next one is never. It also emits nothing and it never calls onComplete action. So this observable is used for testing to prove that no emissions are coming from it, unlike the empty observable, which represent empty data set. And we have to use sleep here just like observable.interval because the main thread is not going to wait after starting this. Next is error method. It takes an exception supplier to supply an exception intentionally, just like we do with the throw keyword in imperative style. Now moving to the next one. Next is defer. It creates a separate state for each observer. For example, suppose you are having a list. This list contains element Ram and Mike. And then you're creating an observable using this defer method. Defer takes a supplier a supplier that also returns an observable. So here we are creating an observable or supplying an observable using the from iterable method and passing this list to this method. Now we are subscribing to the source, or an observer is subscribing to the source that prints each element. And after that, we are adding one more element to this list. So we are modifying the state of this list. And then again, we are subscribing to the source. But this time, it will print Ram, Mike, and Paul. So it also counts for the state changes. Now the next and the last one is from callable. We pass an callable to this from callable to create an observable from that callable. So these were all the methods to create an observable. In next lecture, we will see how we can create or what are the ways to create an observer. So see you guys in the next lecture.